The gavel cracked down so hard, the sound seemed to bruise the room. Daniel Harper flinched anyway. Not because of the noise, because of the words that followed. Temporary removal, the judge said. Flat, controlled, final, until further review. A murmur rippled through the small family courtroom in Mercer County, Pennsylvania. Not loud, just enough. The sound people make when something bad happens to someone else, and they're relieved it isn't them. Daniel stood frozen at the defense table, one hand gripping the edge of the wood like it was the only solid thing left in the world. His knuckles had gone pale, his jaw locked so tight it ached. Across the aisle, the county social worker closed her folder with a soft, satisfied click. Lucy didn't understand the words, not fully, but she understood the tone. She was 9 years old, sitting on the hard bench behind him, her sneakers swinging inches above the floor. When she saw her father's shoulders stiffen, she stopped swinging. When she saw the woman in the blazer glance back at her with that thin, careful smile, her stomach dropped. "Daddy?" she whispered. Daniel didn't turn around. If he did, he knew he would break. The judge cleared her throat. "Mr. Harper, you are ordered to comply with the conditions outlined. Failure to do so will result in further action." Further action. 2 words, heavy as iron. Daniel nodded once. Slow, mechanical. He had learned over years of low pay and long hours and being spoken to like a problem that nodding was safer than speaking. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. His voice didn't crack. That surprised him. The bailiff opened the side door. Wood creaked. The session was over. Just like that. People stood. Papers shuffled. The courtroom exhaled and moved on. Daniel stayed where he was, for half a second, too long. He could still feel the echo of the gavel in his chest. If he had known that the woman who had just sealed the worst moment of his life would be standing on the side of a dark road in the rain. Less than 3 weeks later, stranded and shaking and invisible, he might have laughed. Or he might have screamed. But right now, all he knew was this. He was about to lose his daughter. And no one in that room cared how hard he had tried not to. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled like old paper and disinfectant. Daniel walked with Lucy beside him, her small hand wrapped tight around his wrist, like she was afraid he might disappear if she let go. He could feel the tremble in her fingers. The social worker, Karen Whitfield, caught up to them near the exit. Late 40s. Perfect hair. Perfect posture. The kind of woman who never had grease under her nails. "Mr. Harper," she said, polite and firm, blocking their path with a practiced ease. "I'll be in touch regarding placement details." Placement. Like Lucy was a box. Daniel swallowed. "She's staying with my sister," he said. "Just for now. You know that. It's in the file." Karen nodded, eyes flicking down to Lucy for half a second. Long enough to register the child. Not long enough to see her. "Yes," she said. "For now." Lucy pressed closer to Daniel's side. "Daddy, am I in trouble?" she asked. Karen's smile tightened. "No, sweetheart," she said quickly. "This isn't your fault." Daniel felt something hot flare behind his ribs. He bent down so he was eye level with his daughter. He could smell the cheap shampoo she used. Strawberry, He'd bought it on sale. "You're not in trouble," he said softly. "Not ever. This is just grown-up stuff." Lucy searched his face. She had his eyes. That always hit him like a punch. "When can I come home?" she asked. Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Karen cleared her throat again. "We'll talk soon, Mr. Harper." She stepped around them and walked away, heels clicking in steady confidence down the hall. Daniel watched her go. Then he stood there for a long moment, listening to the sound of the building swallowing itself back into routine. Outside, the sky had gone low and grey. November. The kind of cold that didn't bite. It pressed. They walked to his truck in silence. A rusted pickup with one headlight that flickered when it felt like it. He helped Lucy climb in, buckled her seatbelt twice out of habit, then leaned his forehead against the steering wheel. Just for a second. He didn't cry. He didn't swear. He just breathed. That night, after Lucy fell asleep on her aunt's couch with her backpack still on, Daniel drove aimlessly. No music. No destination. The road unwound under his tires like a quiet dare. He told himself he was thinking about paperwork, about overtime, about what he could fix and what he couldn't. But really he was replaying the courtroom. The judge's voice. The way she hadn't looked at him when she said his name. He didn't know her. Not really. Just a woman in black robes. A role. A decision. He didn't know that beneath that controlled expression was a woman who had gone home that night and sat alone at her kitchen table long after the lights should have been off. He didn't know her name was Eleanor Brooks. He didn't know she had stared at the same 2 words written in her own notes over and over. Temporary removal. And he definitely didn't know that the story between them was already moving quietly toward a collision neither of them could stop. The rain came down sideways hard enough to blur the road into a smear of headlights and wet asphalt. Eleanor Brooks hated driving at night. She hated it even more in weather like this. But she hated empty houses most of all, and the silence waiting for her at the end of the drive felt heavier than the storm. The sedan shuddered once. Then again. The dashboard flashed red. Eleanor tightened her grip on the steering wheel as the engine coughed, stuttered, and finally surrendered. The car rolled to the shoulder with a tired sigh, tires hissing against standing water. When it stopped, the sudden quiet felt unnatural, like the world had leaned in to watch. She sat there for a moment, listening to the rain drum against the roof. Her breath fogged the windshield. She checked her phone. No signal. Of course. Perfect, she muttered. She pushed the door open and stepped out into the cold. The rain soaked her coat instantly, seeping through wool that had seen better winters. She popped the hood, stared at the engine like it might confess something if she looked long enough, then let it fall back down with a hollow clang. Eleanor stood there alone on a rural road lined with bare trees and darkness water dripping from her hair, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Small. The headlights appeared without warning, a single beam at first wobbling through the rain, then the full shape of an old pickup slowing behind her. Gravel crunched. An engine idled rough and uneven. Eleanor's shoulders stiffened. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the careful confidence of someone used to working with his hands. He wore a dark jacket, soaked through at the seams, jeans faded from years of wear boots thick with dried mud. He didn't rush toward her. He stopped a few steps away, hands visible, posture open. "You all right, ma'am?" he called over the rain. Eleanor hesitated. Every instinct, honed by decades of caution, told her to be careful. But the road was empty, the rain relentless, and the man's voice carried no edge, no hurry. "My car died," she said. "I think." He nodded once as if cars dying in the rain was the most ordinary thing in the world. "Mind if I take a look?" She shook her head. "Please." He moved toward the hood, wiped his hands on his jacket and leaned in. The smell of oil and rain mixed in the air. Eleanor watched him work, methodical, unhurried. His brow furrowed slightly as he listened, tapped, adjusted. "Battery's old," he said finally. "Connections loose." She didn't like the cold. He glanced back at her. His eyes were tired. Kind. The eyes of someone who had learned not to expect things to go smoothly. "I've got jumper cables," he added. "If you don't mind waiting a minute." "I don't mind," Eleanor said, then paused. "Thank you." He gave a small shrug, already turning back to his truck. "No trouble." As he worked, the rain seemed to soften, as if even the storm had decided to ease up for a moment. Eleanor hugged her coat tighter around herself, watching the red and black clamps click into place, watching the man move with practiced ease. "What brings you out here so late?" he asked, not looking at her. "Long day," she said. It was true. It was also an evasion. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Those stick with you." The engine coughed, then caught. The sedan came back to life with a low, steady hum. "There you go," he said. "She should get you home." Eleanor exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I don't know how to thank you." He stepped back, rain running down his face. "Just drive safe." She hesitated, then extended her hand. "I'm Eleanor." He took it, his grip warm and firm despite the cold. "Daniel." They stood there for a second longer than necessary, rain dripping between them. "You live around here?" she asked. "Down the road," he said, nodding vaguely into the dark. "Not far," she almost asked more. Almost. Instead, she smiled. "Well, Daniel, you saved my night." He smiled back, a quick flash that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Glad to help." He turned toward his truck, then stopped. "You might want to get that battery checked," he said. "Soon." "I will," Eleanor said. She watched him drive away, tail lights disappearing into the rain. When she slid back into her car, the warmth from the heater felt like a gift she hadn't earned. As she pulled back onto the road, Eleanor's thoughts drifted unbidden to the courtroom, to a man standing rigid at a table, to a child's voice whispering a question that had no good answer. She shook her head as if to clear it. Coincidences, she told herself. Nothing more. 3 days later, Daniel Harper stood in line at the county office, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a number ticket crumpled in his hand. Lucy was at school. For now. He was here to fill out forms he didn't fully understand, to answer questions that felt designed to trap him. A woman in a stiff blazer glanced at his paperwork and frowned. "You're missing a signature." I signed everything Daniel said. Not this one, she replied, tapping the page with a manicured nail. You'll have to come back. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. I took off work for this, he said, keeping his voice level. They don't like me missing shifts. She shrugged. Rules are rules. Behind her, a clock ticked loudly. Each second felt like a small judgment. That evening, Eleanor Brooks sat at her kitchen table, a stack of case summaries spread out before her. She had told herself she was only reviewing upcoming assignments, that she was staying sharp. But one file sat slightly apart from the rest. Daniel Harper. She stared at the name longer than she meant to. Her pen hovered over the page, then tapped once hard enough to leave a small dent. She thought of the rain, of the road, of the man who hadn't known who she was when he stopped. Eleanor pushed the file away. Not my case, she reminded herself. Not my role. Still, the weight of it pressed against her ribs. That night, Daniel lay awake on his sister's couch, staring at the ceiling fan as it creaked in slow circles. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional passing car. He thought about the road, about the woman whose car had died, about the way she had said thank you like it mattered. He didn't know why the memory stuck. Maybe because it felt good to have helped someone when so much felt out of his control. He rolled onto his side, pulling a thin blanket up to his chin. Somewhere across town, Eleanor Brooks turned off her light and stood in the dark, listening to the echo of a choice she had not yet made. Neither of them slept well. Neither of them knew that the storm on that road had only been the beginning. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, folded too neatly, the county seal pressed into the corner like a warning. Daniel saw it when he came home from work, grease still under his nails, the smell of oil clinging to his jacket. His sister had left it on the kitchen counter beside a mug that had gone cold hours ago. He didn't touch it at first. He stood there, keys still in his hand, reading his own name through the envelope, like it might change if he waited long enough. Notice of review. Those words had weight. He felt it settle in his chest before he even opened the paper. Lucy was at the table doing homework, her pencil moving slowly, carefully. She glanced up when she heard the envelope tear. Is that from the school? No, Daniel said. Too quickly. He forced a smile that didn't fool either of them. Just boring, grown-up stuff. The paper rustled as he unfolded it. A follow-up hearing, compliance review, attendance required. He read it twice, 3 times. Each word slid into place like another brick. Lucy watched his face, her eyes tracking every flicker of expression. She had learned in the last few weeks how to read silence better than most adults. Am I coming with you? She asked. Daniel shook his head. No, this one's just me. She nodded, then looked back down at her homework, but her pencil stopped moving. That night, Daniel lay awake again. The ceiling fan ticked. The house breathed around him. He stared into the dark and tried to plan, but the numbers never worked. Overtime meant missing check-ins. Check-ins meant losing overtime. Every choice seemed to cancel out the last. Across town, Eleanor Brooks sat in a small conference room at the courthouse, a dozen files spread across the long table. She wasn't there in her robe. She wasn't there to rule. She was there as an observer, an advisor, one voice among many. She told herself that made it easier. The presiding judge, Mark Ellison, leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temple. He was younger than Eleanor by a decade, his hair still dark, his tie already loosened, though it wasn't yet noon. "These cases are piling up," he said. "We're stretched thin. Social services is pushing hard on compliance." A woman from the county office cleared her throat. "We can't afford exceptions," she said. "If we start making allowances, the system breaks." Eleanor listened. She always listened first. "And what about context?" she asked finally. The woman's lips pressed together. "Context doesn't pay the bills or guarantee safety." Eleanor folded her hands on the table. "Neither does paperwork alone." There was a pause. A small one. But she felt it. Judge Ellison glanced at her. "You're thinking of a specific case." Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She could feel the line she was walking thin as wire. "I'm thinking of patterns," she said instead, "and consequences." The woman from the county frowned. "With respect, Judge Brooks, this isn't about feelings." Eleanor met her gaze. Calm. Steady. "No," she said. "It's about outcomes." Daniel sat on a hard plastic chair outside the hearing room. 2 days later, his hands clasped so tight his fingers tingled. He had changed into his cleanest shirt, the one without stains on the collar. He smelled faintly of detergent and fear. A man in a suit sat across from him, scrolling on his phone. A woman whispered urgently into a headset near the wall. The courthouse hummed with quiet urgency, lives turning on small details. When Daniel's name was called, he stood too fast, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Heads turned. He felt heat creep up his neck. Inside the room, the air felt heavier. Judge Ellison sat at the bench this time. The social worker, Karen Whitfield, was already there, her folder open, her expression composed. Daniel took his place. He didn't look back. The questions came fast. Attendance logs, work schedules, missed appointments. Karen spoke smoothly, efficiently. "Mr. Harper continues to struggle with consistency," she said. "Despite accommodations." Daniel clenched his jaw. "I work nights," he said. "I've said that. I switch shifts when I can." "Yet you still missed the parenting seminar," Karen replied. "I was covering a shift," Daniel said. "If I don't cover shifts, I don't make rent." Judge Ellison held up a hand. "One at a time." Daniel swallowed. His throat felt dry. He could feel the familiar sense of being weighed and found lacking. From her seat along the wall, Eleanor watched. She watched the way Daniel answered without raising his voice, the way he stood straight even when pressed, the way Karen's tone sharpened just slightly when he pushed back. She caught Judge Ellison's eye once, held it, then looked down at her notes. When the hearing adjourned, no decision was announced. Deliberation. More waiting. Daniel walked out into the hallway, feeling hollowed out. Karen passed him without a word. Outside, the sky was pale and thin. He leaned against a column and closed his eyes. "Mr. Harper." He opened them. Eleanor Brooks stood a few feet away, a file tucked under her arm. She wasn't in robes. She looked smaller like this. Older. Human. Daniel stiffened immediately. Recognition flickered, then confusion. "You helped me on the road," she said quietly. He blinked. Once. Twice more. The memory surfaced sharp and sudden. Rain. Headlights. A woman in a wool coat. Yeah, he said slowly. I remember. I wanted to be clear. Eleanor continued. I'm not the presiding judge on your case. Daniel's shoulders eased a fraction. Okay. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. You handled yourself well in there. He let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. Didn't feel like it. She hesitated. He saw it. Something measured. Deliberate. There are programs, she said. Work coordination. Legal aid. They take time. They're not perfect. Daniel looked at the floor. Nothing ever is. Eleanor's mouth curved slightly. No. She met his eyes. Really met them. But the system isn't as fixed as it feels. Not always. Daniel searched her face, trying to understand what she was offering. Advice. Reassurance. Something else. Thank you, he said finally. She nodded once, then stepped back, already retreating into her role, her distance. As she walked away, Daniel stood there, heart pounding, the weight of something unspoken pressing between his ribs. That night, Lucy climbed into bed beside him, her hair still damp from a rushed bath. Did it go okay? She asked. Daniel wrapped an arm around her. It's not over yet. She sighed, small and tired. It's always not over. He kissed the top of her head. Yeah, he said softly. But we're still here. Lucy nodded, already half asleep. Daniel stared into the dark, thinking of a woman on a rainy road, of a courtroom, of a system that felt cold and endless. Across town, Eleanor Brooks sat at her desk, the lamp casting a tight circle of light over her notes. She reread them slowly, deliberately. Outcomes over process. She set her pen down. The next move she knew would cost someone something. The question was, who? The call came just after dawn, sharp enough to slice through the quiet of the house. Daniel woke instantly, heart already racing before he even reached for the phone. He had learned that nothing good arrived early in the morning. "This is Daniel Harper," he said, voice rough. "Mr. Harper, this is Karen Whitfield from County Services." Of course it was. Daniel sat up slowly, careful not to wake Lucy, who was curled into a tight knot beside him on the narrow bed. Her breathing was steady. Trusting. "Yes," he said. "We've received an updated recommendation," Karen continued. Her tone was polite, professional, polished, smooth. "Based on the compliance review, we're requesting an expedited reassessment." Daniel swung his legs off the bed, feet finding the cold floor. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, "that temporary placement may need to be adjusted." Adjusted. The word hit harder than the gavel ever had. "You said she could stay with my sister," Daniel said. "You said that was fine." It was, Karen replied. At the time. Daniel closed his eyes. He could hear Lucy shift slightly, her arm tightening around the pillow. He lowered his voice. "You can't just move her again." "We're not moving anyone yet," Karen said. "But the court will want options." "Options," Daniel repeated. The word tasted like rust. "I'll email the details," Karen said. "You'll need to appear tomorrow." Tomorrow. The call ended before Daniel could say anything else. He sat there for a long moment, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to nothing. When Lucy stirred, he forced his voice steady. "Hey," he said softly. "Time to get ready." She blinked up at him. "Did something happen?" "No," he said. It was a lie, but it was a gentle one. Just work stuff. Lucy studied him the way she always did now, like she was trying to memorize his face. Then she nodded and rolled out of bed. At the courthouse, the air felt different that morning, tighter. Like everyone had been warned not to breathe too loudly, Eleanor Brooks arrived early, her coat still damp from a light mist that clung to the streets. She paused outside the building for a moment, watching the flag above the entrance snap in the wind. She knew what the day was shaping into. She had read the overnight brief. She had seen Karen's recommendation thinly veiled and carefully worded: expedited reassessment. She felt the familiar pull in her chest, the one she had tried to ignore for decades, the pull between what the system allowed and what it pretended not to see. Inside, Judge Ellison stood near the clerk's desk, coffee in hand, his shoulders tense. "You saw the update," he said when he noticed her. "I did," Eleanor replied. He sighed. "They're pushing hard." "They always do," Eleanor said. "It's easier." Ellison glanced at her. "You're worried." "I'm cautious," she corrected. He studied her for a beat. "You want to weigh in?" Eleanor met his gaze. "I want to make sure we don't confuse speed with justice." Ellison nodded slowly. "We'll talk." Daniel arrived with his sister Maria beside him. She was older, sharper, the kind of woman who didn't scare easily. She squeezed his arm once before they entered. "Keep your answers short," she whispered. "Don't give them room." Daniel nodded, though his throat felt too tight for words. Inside the hearing room, Karen Whitfield stood with a new folder. Thicker, more tabs, more reasons. Lucy wasn't there. That alone felt like an accusation. Karen spoke first. "Given Mr. Harper's ongoing scheduling conflicts and missed program requirements, we believe a more stable environment should be considered." Maria leaned forward. "He works," she said sharply. "That's not a crime." Karen smiled thinly. "It's not about crime. It's about consistency." Daniel's hands curled into fists at his sides. Judge Ellison raised a hand. "Let's proceed carefully." From her seat along the wall, Eleanor watched the exchange with a growing sense of unease. She saw how the language shifted, how concern quietly became conclusion. Karen presented her case with practiced ease. Charts, timelines, missed checkmarks. Daniel spoke when asked, his voice controlled but strained. "I do everything I can. I've never missed picking her up. I've never missed feeding her. I've missed meetings because I was working." Karen tilted her head. "Intentions don't negate impact." Eleanor felt something tighten. Judge Ellison leaned back, fingers steepled. The court must consider the child's best interest. Daniel swallowed. "She wants to be with me." Karen didn't hesitate. Children often do. The room fell quiet. That was when Eleanor stood, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to shift the air. "Your Honor," she said. Calm, even. "May I speak?" Ellison looked at her, surprise flickering before he nodded. Briefly, Eleanor stepped forward, hands folded, voice steady. "We are discussing stability, as if it exists in a vacuum. It does not. Removing a child repeatedly in the name of consistency creates its own harm. Karen's jaw tightened. With respect, Judge Brooks, this is not speculation. No. Eleanor agreed. It's experience. Ellison considered this. The room held its breath. Eleanor continued. The system is designed to protect children, not punish parents for poverty. There is a difference. Karen spoke quickly. No one is punishing anyone. Eleanor turned to her. Then let's stop framing work as a liability. Silence stretched. Ellison exhaled. I'm not issuing a removal today, he said finally. I want a full review. With accommodations. Karen's expression flickered. Just once. Daniel's knees nearly gave out. Outside, the sky had cleared the light, sharp and bright, in a way that hurt the eyes. Daniel leaned against the stone wall, breathing hard. Maria hugged him. Not today, she murmured. That's something. Eleanor exited a few moments later. Daniel straightened instinctively. She stopped, a respectful distance away. It's not over, she said. But today mattered. Daniel nodded. Thank you. She studied him, something unreadable in her eyes. Keep showing up, she said. That counts more than you know. That evening, Daniel picked Lucy up from school himself. She ran to him, backpack bouncing arms, flinging tight around his waist. Did they decide she asked into his jacket? Not yet, he said, holding her. But we're still together. She smiled weird and unguarded, and that was enough to make his chest ache. Across town, Eleanor sat alone at her dining table, the day replaying in her mind. She knew Karen would not stop. She knew the system rarely liked being challenged. She looked down at her hands. Steady. Capable. Still powerful if she chose to be. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows. The storm had not passed. It was only gathering. The notice was waiting when Daniel opened his locker at work, folded once taped crookedly to the inside of the dented metal door. Mandatory schedule adjustment. He stared at the words until they blurred. The shop floor hummed behind him. Air compressors kicking on and off, the smell of coolant and hot steel thick in the air. His supervisor, Rick, leaned against the tool bench nearby. Arms crossed, jaw set in that way that meant bad news had already decided itself. You got it, Rick said, not unkindly. They're cutting overtime again. Daniel folded the paper carefully, slower than necessary. I told you my situation. Rick nodded. I know. But corporate doesn't. And they don't like exceptions. Daniel's mouth went dry. I need the hours. Rick sighed, eyes flicking away. Everybody does. Daniel closed the locker and rested his forehead against the cool metal for a second. Not long enough for anyone to comment. Long enough to breathe. That afternoon, Lucy came home with a flyer crumpled in her backpack. Field trip permission slip. Museum in Pittsburgh. Bus leaves at 6:30 in the morning. Daniel read it twice. The date circled in blue pen. Same day as the next review meeting. He folded the paper and slid it into his pocket, the edges pressing against his thigh like a reminder that time was a currency he didn't have. At the courthouse, Eleanor Brooks stood in the records office with a clerk half her age, the hum of fluorescent lights making everything feel brittle. She wasn't there to interfere. She told herself that again. She was there to understand. Patterns, she said, softly scanning a screen, filled with case numbers. Show me the reassessments flagged for expedited action. The clerk hesitated. Those are internal. Eleanor met her eyes. I'm internal. A beat. Then the clerk typed. The list populated quickly, too quickly. Eleanor leaned closer. How many of these involve missed work-related compliance? The clerk swallowed. Most. Eleanor felt a familiar anger rise, cold and precise. She had seen this before. The language of care, weaponized by convenience. Who's authorizing the acceleration? She asked. The clerk hesitated again. Karen Whitfield's team. Of course. Eleanor thanked her and stepped back into the hall, the echo of footsteps carrying farther than they should. She knew this terrain, knew how easily good intentions slid into institutional momentum. She also knew she was running out of room to pretend this was none of her business. Daniel stood in line at the grocery store that evening, counting bills in his head, while Lucy examined a rack of candy by the register. He caught her reflection in the glass. Small, patient, too used to waiting. Can I get it one? She asked, holding up a chocolate bar. He smiled. Maybe next time. She nodded without complaint and put it back. Outside, the air had gone sharp. Daniel loaded the groceries into the truck and sat behind the wheel hands, resting engine off. The day pressed in on him, heavy and relentless. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Hello? Mr. Harper, a woman said. Calm, measured. This is Angela Reyes. I'm with Legal Aid of Mercer County. Daniel straightened. Okay. I received a referral, she continued. I'd like to talk about representation. His chest tightened. I didn't ask for... I know, Angela said gently. But someone noticed your file. Daniel thought of the hallway, of Eleanor's steady eyes. He swallowed. When? Tonight, if you're available. He looked at Lucy, already buckled in the passenger seat, swinging her feet. Yes, he said. Yes, I am. They met at a small office above a closed bookstore, the kind of place that smelled faintly of dust and coffee. Angela Reyes was younger than he expected, early 40s hair, pulled back, tight, eyes sharp and kind in equal measure. She listened, didn't interrupt, took notes with quick, precise strokes. They're pushing for speed, she said when he finished. That usually means pressure, not danger. Daniel frowned. What's the difference? Danger is specific, she replied. Pressure is lazy. She leaned back. We can ask for accommodations, formal ones. Put them on record. They don't like that, Daniel said. Angela smiled thinly. No, they don't. Across town, Eleanor Brooks sat at her desk long after dark. The house quiet except for the clock on the wall. She had a yellow legal pad in front of her, lines filled with names, arrows, dates. She had not crossed any rules, not yet. But she was standing close enough to feel the heat. Her phone buzzed. Judge Ellison, walk with me tomorrow, he said. Early, of course, Eleanor replied. She set the phone down and stared at the pad. Outcomes over process she had written again. This time she circled it. The next morning, Daniel stood outside Lucy's school watching her line up with the other kids. The bus idled hissing softly. She turned and waved her grin bright and unguarded. He waved back, heart aching. The review meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. At the courthouse, Judge Ellison and Eleanor walked the length of the corridor, in silence, their footsteps echoing. "They're escalating," Ellison said finally. "I can feel it." Eleanor nodded. "So can I." Ellison stopped near a window overlooking the parking lot. "You're close to this one." "I'm careful," Eleanor said. "That's not an answer." She met his gaze. "I believe the system is mistaking poverty for neglect." Ellison sighed. "Belief doesn't carry rulings." "No," Eleanor agreed. "But precedent does." She turned slightly. "We've seen the damage of rapid removals. We've documented it. Ignoring that is a choice." Ellison studied her for a long moment. "Karen won't like this." Eleanor's mouth curved faintly. "Karen doesn't have to." The hearing room filled slowly that afternoon. Daniel sat beside Angela Reyes, his leg bouncing despite his best effort to keep still. Karen Whitfield sat across the room, a new associate beside her whispering. Lucy wasn't there again. Judge Ellison entered. The room rose and settled. Karen began, her tone sharpened by urgency. "Given recent developments, we recommend temporary placement in a certified foster environment pending compliance." Daniel's breath caught. Angela stood. "We object." Karen's eyes flicked toward her annoyance barely masked. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that employment instability is not evidence of parental unfitness," Angela said evenly. "And that repeated displacement is demonstrably harmful." She handed documents forward. Studies, schedules, affidavits. Eleanor watched from the wall, heart pounding, every muscle still. Judge Ellison leafed through the papers. Slowly, deliberately. Karen pressed. "The child's safety has not been compromised," Ellison said, holding up a hand. Silence fell. Ellison looked at Daniel. "Mr. Harper, do you understand the expectations placed upon you?" Daniel stood. His voice shook once, then steadied. "Yes, Your Honor. I show up. I work. I take care of my daughter. I will keep doing that." Ellison nodded. He glanced toward Eleanor for a fraction of a second. "Just long enough. The court denies the request for removal," he said. "We will proceed with monitored support." Karen's jaw tightened. Daniel sagged relief crashing through him so hard he had to grip the table. Outside, the sky had gone red and blue. Lucy waited on the steps with Maria eyes searching until she found him. "Daddy," she cried, running. He caught her, lifted her, held her tight. Eleanor watched from a distance, chest tight, the scene searing itself into her memory. She knew this wasn't the end, but for the first time in weeks, the balance had tipped, and somewhere in the machinery of the system, a gear had shifted. The backlash didn't come with raised voices or slammed doors. It arrived quietly in emails copied to too many people, in meetings Daniel wasn't invited to, in the subtle tightening of rules that had never been written down before. At the shop, Rick stopped, meeting his eyes. Daniel noticed it on a Thursday afternoon, when his badge didn't open the side door like it always had. He stood there for a second, rain starting to spit from a low grey sky. Then tried again. Nothing. Rick appeared a moment later, keys in hand. System glitch, Rick said, already unlocking the door. He didn't look up. Inside, Daniel found his workstation cleared. Tools neatly stacked, his name missing from the shift board. "What's going on?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice level. Rick rubbed the back of his neck. "They moved you to days." Daniel felt the words land before they made sense. "You said days weren't available." "They are now." "I can't work days," Daniel said. "I have Lucy before and after school." Rick exhaled. "I know. Corporate decision." Daniel stood there, the hum of machines, suddenly too loud. "So what are you saying?" Rick finally met his eyes. There was apology there. And distance. "I'm saying if you can't take the shift, they'll consider it a voluntary separation." Voluntary. The word twisted. Daniel nodded once. He had learned when to stop pushing. "I'll need a day." Rick hesitated, then nodded. "Take today." Daniel walked out without his jacket. By the time he reached the parking lot, the rain had started in earnest. He sat in the truck, hands on the wheel, watching water bead and run down the windshield. The engine stayed off. His phone buzzed. "Angela." "They changed my hours," he said when she answered. He didn't bother with hello. "I think they're trying to push me out." There was a pause. Papers shifting. "That's not accidental," she said. "It's retaliation adjacent." Adjacent. Another careful word. "What do I do?" Daniel asked. "You document," Angela replied. "Everything. And you don't quit." Daniel laughed once, sharp and humorless. "I don't have many options. You have more than they think," she said. "Trust me." That night, Lucy noticed. "You're home early," she said, peering at him over the edge of her book. "Yeah," Daniel said. "Schedule change." She frowned. "Is that bad?" Daniel sat beside her, the couch sagging under their combined weight. "It's just different." Lucy studied him. "Different like when Aunt Maria cries in the kitchen." Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe." She slid closer, her shoulder pressing into his side. "I don't like different." "Me neither," he said. Across town, Eleanor Brooks sat in a closed session with 2 other judges and a county administrator whose tie was too tight and whose patience was thinner than he pretended. "We're getting complaints," the administrator said. "Interference. Overreach." Eleanor folded her hands. "From whom?" "County Services," he replied. "Specifically, Miss Whitfield." Eleanor felt no surprise. "About what?" "About perceived influence," he said, carefully. "Advisory comments. Contextual framing." She met his gaze. "Those are my responsibilities. One could argue you're shaping outcomes." Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "One could argue that ignoring evidence shapes them more." The administrator shifted. "This is becoming political." Eleanor's eyes hardened. "Children's lives are not politics." Silence stretched. One of the other judges cleared his throat. "We're not accusing," he said. "We're advising caution." Eleanor nodded. "I've been cautious my entire career." The meeting ended without resolution. That worried her more than opposition would have. Later alone in her car, Eleanor sat with her hands resting on the steering wheel, not driving. The dashboard clock ticked forward, indifferent. She thought of Daniel's face when the removal had been denied. Relief layered over fear, like he didn't trust good news to last. She thought of Karen Whitfield's tightened jaw. Eleanor had seen this pattern before. When the system didn't get its way, it found another lever. She reached for her phone, stopped, then set it down again. Not yet, she told herself. Timing mattered. Daniel's situation worsened quickly. By Monday, his hours were officially reassigned. By Wednesday, his paycheck shrank. By Friday, the school called to say Lucy had been waiting at pickup for 20 minutes before Maria arrived, breathless and apologetic. Karen Whitfield noted the incident in her file. Daniel found out 2 days later. Angela slammed the folder shut. They're building a narrative. Daniel stared at the floor of her office. I can't be in 2 places at once. No, Angela said. But they're pretending you can. He rubbed his face with both hands. I'm losing ground. Angela leaned forward. You're being pushed. That means you're close to something they don't want. Daniel looked up. What could I possibly threaten? Angela hesitated. Not you. The story. That night, Eleanor Brooks attended a small community fundraiser at the public library. Folding chairs, coffee in paper cups, the kind of event she used to love before it became a place people watched her too closely. She was scanning the room when she heard her name. Judge Brooks. Karen Whitfield stood a few feet away, smiling too widely. I was hoping to run into you. Eleanor returned the smile measured. Ms. Whitfield. Karen gestured to an empty corner. A word. They stood beneath a faded poster about literacy rates. I'm concerned, Karen began. About boundaries. Eleanor tilted her head. In what sense? Your involvement in certain cases has become noticeable, Karen said. Parents are starting to expect leniency. Eleanor's voice stayed calm. They should expect fairness. Karen's smile faltered. We all want what's best for the children. Then we agree, Eleanor said. Karen's eyes sharpened. Do we? A silence settled between them, thick and uncomfortable. Be careful, Karen said quietly. People are watching. Eleanor leaned in just enough to make her point land. They always have. She walked away before Karen could respond, heart pounding, the weight of years pressing in. She knew that warning for what it was. The next morning, Daniel received a call from the school counselor. Lucy had been withdrawn, quiet, asked if she was going to live somewhere else again. Daniel hung up and sat in his truck, hands shaking rage and fear tangling in his chest. He didn't know who to fight. The court, his job, the system, himself. That afternoon, as he stood outside Lucy's school, waiting, he saw Eleanor Brooks across the street. Not in a robe, not in a courtroom, just a woman standing still, watching children spill out onto the sidewalk. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved. Then Eleanor crossed the street. I wanted to check on her, she said softly. Daniel nodded, throat tight. They're squeezing me. I know, Eleanor said. No pretense, no denial. He searched her face. Why? She held his gaze. Because the system resists being challenged. Lucy burst through the doors, then spotted Daniel and ran. Eleanor stepped back, giving them space, watching as the child threw her arms around her father's waist. Lucy glanced up at Eleanor. "Hi." Eleanor smiled. "Hi." Lucy tilted her head. "You look like the rain lady." Daniel froze. Eleanor's breath caught. "The rain lady," she repeated gently. Lucy nodded. "Daddy helped you?" Eleanor looked at Daniel, then really looked. The pieces clicking into place with quiet force. The moment stretched, charged, and fragile. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he said. "That was me." Eleanor straightened, the full weight of recognition settling in her eyes. She had known, and now she understood. Everything. The realization didn't explode. It settled. Eleanor felt it sink into her chest with the slow, undeniable weight of truth. The man standing in front of her, one arm wrapped around his daughter, the same man whose file had crossed her desk, whose life was being compressed by procedures and quiet punishments, was the same man who had knelt in the rain without asking a single question. Daniel Harper had helped her when she was no one to him, and the system she had served for decades was now grinding him down. Lucy tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy, can we go home now?" Daniel nodded, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "Yeah. Let's go." He turned back to Eleanor, uncertain, respectful, guarded. "Thank you," he said, for the concern for the check-in for whatever line she was walking. Eleanor inclined her head. "I'll be in touch," she said. It was careful language, necessary language. They parted without ceremony. But as Eleanor watched them walk away, Lucy's small hand swallowed by her father's larger one, she felt something harden inside her. Not anger. Resolve. That evening, Eleanor did something she hadn't done in years. She pulled an old binder from the back of her study cabinet. Thick, worn, tabs yellowed with age. It contained records from a different time when she had still believed the system corrected itself. She spread the pages across her desk and began to read. Patterns emerged quickly when you knew how to look. Escalations following resistance. Employment instability quietly reframed as neglect. Language softened just enough to sound reasonable. She took notes, not as a judge, as a witness. Across town, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with Mariah and Lucy, bills stacked in uneven piles. Maria's jaw was tight as she scanned the numbers. "You're bleeding from 3 directions," she said. "Work, court, school." "I know," Daniel said. Lucy colored quietly, her crayon strokes slower than usual. Maria leaned forward. "You can stay here as long as you need." Daniel shook his head. "That'll look worse." "Everything looks worse to them," Maria snapped. Then she softened. "Sorry." Daniel rubbed his hands together, the calluses rough against each other. "Angela says to keep documenting." Maria scoffed. "You're not a spreadsheet." "No," he said quietly. "But that's how they see me." The next day, Karen Whitfield sat in her office, reviewing updates. She paused at a note from the school counselor, then added a comment of her own. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She worked efficiently. Later that afternoon, she received an email marked Internal Review. She frowned. At the courthouse, Eleanor met with Judge Ellison behind closed doors. The blinds were half drawn, the late afternoon light cutting the room into sharp angles. "You're asking for a lot," Ellison said. "I'm asking for scrutiny," Eleanor replied. "The kind we demand of parents but rarely apply to ourselves." Ellison leaned back. "Karen's team won't cooperate." "They don't have to," Eleanor said. "Records do." He studied her. "This could come back on you." Eleanor's voice was steady. "It already has." Ellison exhaled. "You're certain?" She didn't hesitate. "I am." That night, Daniel received another call from Angela. Her voice was lower, more urgent. "Things are shifting," she said. "I can't say how yet. But you need to stay exactly where you are. Don't miss anything. Don't react." Daniel closed his eyes. "I'm tired." "I know," Angela said. "But this matters." He hung up and stared at the wall. Lucy padded in a moment later, dragging her blanket. "Can I sleep here?" she asked. "Always," he said, lifting her up. She curled against him, warm and solid. Real. Eleanor didn't sleep. She drafted a memo instead. Careful. Precise. It outlined concerns without accusation, evidence without emotion. She sent it to oversight, to compliance, to ethics. She paused before hitting send. Then she thought of rain, of cold hands and jumper cables, of a man who had done the right thing without knowing it mattered. She pressed send. The response came faster than she expected. A meeting was scheduled, mandatory attendance. Karen Whitfield read the notice twice, then a third time. Her jaw tightened. She closed her office door. By the end of the week, the pressure intensified. Daniel's supervisor informed him his role was under review. The school requested another meeting. A neighbor mentioned a county car idling across the street one afternoon. Angela's voice sharpened. "They're rattled." Daniel laughed bitterly. "I'm the one rattling." "No," she said. "You're the catalyst." At the courthouse, Eleanor walked the halls with a different posture now. Still controlled, still calm, but no longer cautious. She passed Karen Whitfield near the elevators. Karen stopped her. "You're playing a dangerous game." Eleanor met her gaze. "So are you." Karen's smile was thin. "You think this ends well?" "I think it ends honestly," Eleanor said. "For once." The elevator doors closed between them. That evening, Eleanor stood in her kitchen, the phone in her hand. She dialed, waited. "Mr. Harper," she said when Daniel answered. "This is Eleanor Brooks." Daniel straightened. "Yes." "There are things in motion," she continued. "You should be prepared for what he asked, for the truth," she said. After she hung up, Daniel sat very still. Lucy looked up at him. "Is it bad?" He thought of all the times he'd been told to wait, to comply, to trust. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But it's changing." Lucy nodded, satisfied for now, and went back to her drawing. Outside, the sky darkened, clouds rolling in low and heavy. The storm wasn't over. It was finally being seen. The hearing was set for Monday morning. Quietly added to the docket without press or notice, the kind of proceeding meant to correct paperwork rather than expose fault. That alone told Eleanor everything. Daniel arrived early, wearing the same clean shirt sleeves, buttoned hands, steady by force of will. Angela sat beside him, legal pad, ready eyes alert. Lucy waited with Maria in the hallway, coloring on the floor with careful concentration. Karen Whitfield entered last. She took her seat without looking at Daniel, without acknowledging Eleanor, who stood along the wall again. No robe, no authority on Hooper, only presence. Karen's associate leaned close, whispering. Karen nodded once. Judge Ellison took the bench expression unreadable. "Let's proceed," he said. Karen began, voice smooth, confident. "This is a routine status review, prompted by concerns regarding escalating instability." Angela rose immediately. "We object to that characterization." Karen smiled thinly. "The record speaks for itself." Angela held up a document. "The record now includes employer correspondence indicating forced schedule changes initiated after court involvement." A murmur rippled through the room. Karen's eyes flicked toward the page. "Employment decisions are not within our purview." "No," Angela agreed. "But their consequences are being used as justification." Judge Ellison leaned forward. "Ms. Whitfield, were you aware of these changes when you submitted your recommendation?" Karen hesitated. "Just a fraction too long." "We were informed." "Informed," Ellison repeated. "Or advised." Silence. Eleanor felt the room shift the way it did when a narrative cracked. Angela continued laying documents on the table one by one. Timelines, emails, internal notes obtained through request. A pattern emerged, undeniable when seen together. Karen's associate whispered again. Karen shook her head, jaw tight. "This is speculation," Karen said sharply. "Our priority has always been the child." Eleanor stepped forward. "Your Honor," she said. Ellison nodded. "Proceed." Eleanor's voice carried calm and unyielding. "If that were true, we would see interventions that stabilize families, not pressures that fracture them." Karen turned toward her. "Judge Brooks, this is highly inappropriate." Eleanor didn't look at her. "What is inappropriate is the quiet escalation of punitive measures framed as care." Ellison held up a hand. "Ms. Whitfield, answer the question." Karen's lips parted, then closed. "I acted within policy," she said. Eleanor met her gaze then. "Policy is not the same as purpose." The room held its breath. Ellison leaned back, fingers steepled. "This court will recess for deliberation." The gavel fell. Once. In the hallway, tension hummed like a live wire. Daniel stood rigid, heart pounding, the weight of the moment pressing hard against his ribs. Lucy looked up from her coloring. "Is it over?" "Not yet," Daniel said, crouching beside her. "But we're close." She nodded solemnly and handed him a crayon. "For luck." He took it, the simple faith nearly undoing him. Karen stood apart, phone pressed to her ear, voice low and urgent. When she noticed Eleanor watching, she turned away. Minutes stretched. Then the doors opened. Judge Ellison emerged, face set. "Back in session." They filed in. Ellison didn't waste time. The court finds sufficient cause to suspend further removal actions pending independent review. Daniel's breath caught. Ellison continued. "Additionally, concerns have been raised regarding procedural conduct. An external audit will be initiated." Karen's face drained of color. "This is an overreaction," she said. Ellison's voice hardened. This is oversight. He looked at Daniel. Mr. Harper, effective immediately. Your custodial arrangement remains unchanged. Support services will be coordinated to accommodate your employment. Daniel's knees weakened. He gripped the table, tears burning hot behind his eyes. Ellison glanced toward Eleanor. Judge Brooks will serve as liaison to the Oversight Committee. Karen stood abruptly. That's unacceptable. Ellison met her glare. Sit down. Karen sat. Outside sunlight spilled across the steps, sharp and blinding. Daniel stepped into it. Lucy running toward him, arms flung wide. We won, she cried. He lifted her, laughing and crying at once. Not exactly, he said. But we're still together. Eleanor watched from a distance, heart pounding the cost of what she'd done settling into her bones. Angela approached her. That took courage. Eleanor shook her head. It took timing. Karen exited moments later, eyes hard, posture rigid. She paused near Eleanor. This isn't finished, Karen said quietly. Eleanor nodded. No. It's finally begun. That afternoon, news traveled faster than anyone expected. A local reporter called Angela. A question about audits, about oversight, about patterns. Eleanor declined comment. Daniel returned to the shop the next day. Rick met him at the door. Expression strained. Corporate wants a meeting, Rick said. HR. Legal. Daniel nodded. I'll bring counsel. Rick blinked, then nodded back. Lucy slept that night, curled against Daniel's side, breathing slow and even. For the first time in weeks, Daniel slept too. Eleanor sat at her desk, the oversight binder open, notes filling the margins. She knew the scrutiny would turn toward her next. She welcomed it. Her phone buzzed, a message from Judge Ellison. Brace yourself. She smiled faintly. Outside, rain began again, light this time, tapping softly against the windows. Not a storm, a cleansing. The call from Human Resources came at 9:15 in the morning. The tone rehearsed the words, chosen to sound neutral. Daniel listened without interrupting, his face unreadable, his hands folded on the table in Angela Reyes's office. The speakerphone crackled as the HR representative outlined concerns reviews, restructuring. Words that meant distance, liability, exit. I understand, Daniel said, when the voice finally paused. My attorney will respond in writing. Silence, then a stiff acknowledgement. The call ended. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the tension easing from his shoulders, just enough to feel the ache underneath. They're going to push me out, he said. Angela nodded. They were always going to try. Now they have to be careful. Careful doesn't pay the bills. No, she agreed. But documentation does. Across town, Eleanor Brooks stood before the Oversight Committee, a long table separating her from 3 men and 2 women, whose faces revealed nothing. A recorder blinked red in the corner. Judge Brooks, the chair said. You understand the seriousness of these proceedings? I do, Eleanor replied. You've alleged systemic pressure leading to punitive outcomes. I've documented it, Eleanor said calmly. Allegations imply speculation. This is pattern. They asked her about memos, about timing. about her proximity to Daniel Harper's case. She answered each question without hesitation, without defensiveness. "Did you know Mr. Harper prior to these events?" one member asked. Eleanor paused just long enough to respect the truth. "I encountered him once incidentally, weeks before his case escalated." "And did that influence your actions?" "No," Eleanor said. "It clarified them." The room shifted. Outside the committee room, Karen Whitfield sat rigidly on a bench, hands clasped, foot tapping once, twice, then still. She had been called next. Daniel picked Lucy up from school early that afternoon. The secretary smiled too brightly, as if trying to compensate for weeks of tension with a single gesture. Lucy climbed into the truck and buckled herself in, her movements careful. "Are you mad?" she asked. "No," Daniel said. "Just thinking. About court, about life," he corrected. She considered that. "I like when you're thinking," she said. "You get quiet, but you're still here." Daniel smiled, a soft ache behind it. At home, a manila envelope waited in the mailbox. Daniel recognized the return address before he opened it. County Oversight Commission. His hands trembled as he tore it open. A notice. Temporary protections affirmed. Retaliatory actions under review. Further contact to follow. He sank onto the porch step, the wood creaking beneath his weight. Lucy sat beside him, leaning her head against his arm. "Is it good?" she asked. "It's not bad," he said, and laughed quietly. "That's a win these days." Inside the courthouse, Karen Whitfield's hearing did not go as she expected. Questions came faster, sharper, less forgiving. Why were alternative accommodations not pursued? A committee member asked. They were, Karen said. Informally. "Informal measures do not appear in the record," another replied. Karen's jaw tightened. "The record doesn't capture everything." "Then perhaps the problem is what you choose to record." When she exited the room, her posture had changed. Smaller, tighter. The armor she had worn so comfortably no longer fit. That evening, Eleanor Brooks walked home instead of driving. The air was cool, the sky washed pale by the fading sun. Neighbors nodded as she passed. Some smiled, some didn't. At her front door, she paused, listening to the quiet of the house before entering. She set her bag down, poured herself a glass of water, and stood at the kitchen window watching dusk settle. Her phone buzzed. A text from Judge Ellison. "They're recommending formal findings." Eleanor exhaled slowly. About time. The days that followed unfolded with a strange mix of urgency and waiting. Daniel attended meetings with Angela, filed statements, documented everything. The shop placed him on paid administrative leave, a compromise that felt temporary and tense. Lucy adjusted in small ways. She stopped asking when things would be over. She started asking what they were doing tomorrow. One afternoon, Eleanor visited the school. Not officially, not announced. She sat quietly in the back during a parent meeting listening. She watched Lucy answer a question about her favorite subject. Reading, Lucy said, "Because stories tell you what people don't say." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. The oversight report was released on a Friday morning. It was dry, clinical, devastating. Findings of procedural overreach, inconsistent application of policy, evidence of undue pressure on vulnerable families. Karen Whitfield was placed on administrative leave pending further action. The county issued a statement, vague, apologetic without apology. Daniel read the report twice, then set it down, hands shaking. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired and relieved and wary. Angela called an hour later. "We're filing for full dismissal of removal proceedings." Daniel closed his eyes. "Thank you." "No," Angela said. "Thank you for standing." That night, Eleanor received a letter. Handwritten. Careful. "Dear Judge Brooks," it began. "I don't know how to say this the right way. I just know things are different now. Lucy sleeps through the night. I do too sometimes. I wanted you to know that." Eleanor folded the letter and placed it in the binder. Not as evidence, as reminder. On Monday morning, Daniel returned to the courthouse one last time. This time, Lucy sat beside him, feet not swinging, posture steady. Judge Ellison looked at them, then at the file, then back again. "The court finds no basis for continued supervision," he said. "All proceedings are hereby closed." Daniel felt the room tilt, then right itself. He wrapped an arm around Lucy, who squeezed back hard. Outside, reporters waited. Cameras. Questions. Daniel held Lucy's hand and kept walking. Eleanor watched from the steps, the weight of months lifting slowly. She knew there would be consequences. For her. For the system. For everyone involved. But she also knew this. For once, the machinery had paused long enough to see a person. And that mattered. The first morning without court dates felt unreal. Daniel woke before the alarm, out of habit, heart already braced for impact, then lay still as the quiet settled in. No phone buzzing. No deadlines stacked like threats. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and Lucy's soft breathing from the next room. He stood, made coffee, burned the first batch of pancakes the way he always did. When Lucy shuffled in, hair, wild eyes half shut, she wrinkled her nose at the smell and smiled. "You burned them again," she said. "Tradition," Daniel replied. "They ate anyway. Life didn't transform overnight. Bills still came. The truck still rattled when it idled. Daniel's job situation remained unresolved, but now it was paperwork, not punishment. Negotiation, not pressure. Angela handled the calls. Rick checked in more than he used to, quieter, careful. At school, Lucy stopped flinching when her name was called over the loudspeaker. She stopped asking if people were watching. Her teacher noticed first, then the counselor. Small changes, real ones. Across town, Eleanor Brooks packed up her office. The oversight committee had not censured her. They hadn't praised her either. The final memo thanked her for her service and reassigned her to advisory duties only effective immediately. A polite sidelining. The kind that looked neutral on paper and felt like consequence in the bones. Eleanor accepted it without protest. She cleared her desk slowly. The old binder went into a box labeled personal. She hesitated over Daniel's letter, then placed it inside as well. Not hidden. Just protected. On her last afternoon in the building, she walked the halls one final time, listening to the echo of her own footsteps. Clerks nodded. Some avoided her eyes. A few smiled with something like respect. Judge Ellison caught up to her near the exit. You good? Eleanor considered the question, then nodded. I am. You changed things, he said quietly. So did they, she replied. That's how systems move. They push back. He smiled faintly. You don't regret it? No, Eleanor said. I regret not doing it sooner. Outside, the sky was wide and clean. Eleanor breathed it in and walked away without looking back. Weeks passed. Daniel found work at a smaller repair shop on the edge of town. Fewer hours, less pay. But the owner was a man who looked him in the eye and didn't flinch when Daniel mentioned court or school schedules. Lucy started taking the bus home again. Pancakes were still burned. Nobody complained. One Saturday morning, Daniel spotted Eleanor at the public library. She was sitting at a long table near the windows reading a stack of books beside her. Not legal texts. History. Memoir. He hesitated, then approached. Judge Brooks, he said. She looked up and smiled. Daniel. Please. Eleanor. Lucy stepped forward, shy but curious. Hi. Hi, Eleanor said warmly. How's school? Lucy thought. Better. Daniel nodded. Much better. They stood there for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid resting gently between them. I wanted to thank you, Daniel said. Not for the outcome, for the way you stood there. Eleanor shook her head. I didn't stand alone. No, Daniel agreed. But you didn't step away either. She accepted that with a quiet nod. They talked briefly. About books, about Lucy's favorite stories, about nothing that needed to be written down or defended. When they parted, it felt complete. That night, Eleanor wrote one final note in her journal. Power does not announce itself. It reveals itself in moments when no one is watching. She closed the book and turned off the light. Months later, the county issued a revised set of guidelines. Language changed. Timelines softened. Accommodations were written into policy instead of margins. It wasn't justice rewritten, but it was movement. Daniel read the notice online, then closed the laptop and went outside to help Lucy with her bike. Watch, she said, wobbling slightly. I'm watching, he replied, hands hovering ready, but not touching. She pedaled forward on her own, laughing when she nearly tipped, then steadied herself and kept going. Daniel felt something settle in his chest. Not victory, not relief. Peace. Sometimes, late at night, when rain tapped softly against the windows, Daniel thought about that night on the road, about a stranger with jumper cables, about how small choices echoed farther than anyone could predict. Sometimes Eleanor thought about it too, not as a story about courts or systems or consequences, but as a reminder that dignity could be returned quietly if someone was willing to hold the line. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with these 3 words. Kindness still matters.